mind, but how did you become an astronaut? I said, well, unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the very last Apollo mission, Apollo 17. 1972, I was 9 years old, and we were watching it on TV because it was televised all the time. Every mission was televised. That was the very last mission. And there we were with the black and white TV. We didn't have cable. Whenever something important came on, siempre me ponían a mí a detener la antena. I was the youngest one, right? And you guys know, well, the kids don't know, but the older people know. When you grab that antenna, all of a sudden the picture improved, huh? You let go of it, and it got worse. So my dad would say, ahí quédate. So there I am watching, there I am watching the very last man who ever walked on the moon, Gene Cernan, holding the antenna. I kid around with my older brothers and sisters, and I tell them, you guys should have helped me, and maybe you could have been astronauts too. And they scratch their head and they say, what does that have to do with being an astronaut? I said, well, it was through osmosis that I became an astronaut. So I was holding the antenna, wave went through my body, and I became an astronaut. I got programmed. Pero the one thing I remember that day in terms of how the dream was born to become an astronaut was that I remember when the family had their fill of watching the moonwalk. My dad let me let go of the antenna, y pobrecito lo arreglaba la televisión lo mejor que podía, and then I would sit in front of the TV and watch Gene Cernan walk on the surface of the moon. And then it was a day like this, I would go outside and I would see the moon up there. Come back inside, see Gene Cernan bunny hop on the moon, talk to Mission Control Houston, and then I would go outside and see the moon, and I was mesmerized because the moon, 250,000 miles away, yet we have humans up there, and I was watching them live on TV. And that's when I got my calling. That's when I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be an astronaut. And the most important thing that I did was I shared that with my parents. I shared that with mi papá. And my dad said, ¿Cómo que quieres ser astronauta? He said, vamos a la cocina. I thought I was in trouble. And my dad sat me down in the kitchen and he said, so you want to be what? I said, I want to be an astronaut. He looked at me and he says, I think you can do it. He says, all you need is to follow this recipe, 5-step recipe. Very simple. He says, you follow this, you can be whatever you want. And then he looked around as if he was going to tell me it's a secret between he and I. And he said, the first thing you got to do is define what you want to be when you grow up. What is it that Jose wants to be? Second, he said, and of course I blurted out, astronaut. So I figured I was halfway there, right? Second, he says, you have to understand how far you are from that goal. And I said, well, I'm the son of migrant farm workers. That's pretty far, huh? And he laughed and said, I'm glad you recognize that, because the third step's even more important. You got to draw yourself a roadmap from where you understand where you're at to where you want to go. And don't skip steps, because if you skip steps, you may get there, but you won't be well prepared. I said, what's the fourth step? So you're doing it already. Get yourself an education. And fifth and final step, he says, the same work ethic you put in the fields, picking cucumbers, cherries, and peaches, you put in your books. And then you put it in your job when you graduate college. Always give more than what they expect. He said, you mix that, and you can be whatever you want. Why? Porque estamos aquí en Estados Unidos. You can reach the American dream. And I said, wow, my dad thinks I can be an astronaut, therefore I'm going to be an astronaut. And that's the power of empowerment, the power of parents educating the kids. Education starts at home. And I'm a firm believer of that. The only other ingredient I would add is perseverance, a 6th ingredient. Because you can't give up. You can't give up. It took me 12 times to get selected as a NASA astronaut. Not once, not twice. I applied 12 times. NASA said no 11 times. So you can't give up. And so you always got to prepare yourself. One year, I noticed all the astronauts were pilots. I wasn't a pilot. Guess what? I learned how to fly. Another year, I learned that they were all scuba divers. I didn't know how to scuba dive. Guess what? I went to Monterey and I learned how to scuba dive. Another year I had heard that NASA, that the US and Russia signed an agreement to build the International Space Station up in space. It didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out we were going to be working up in space with the Russians. So in my job at the laboratory, Lawrence Livermore Lab, I accepted a job that took me to Russia in the nuclear non-proliferation arena. Not because I wanted to get to know the Siberian countryside, but because it justified me getting a Russian instructor, I was able to learn Russian to make me a better candidate for NASA. And it worked. That's what worked. That's what it takes. A lot of people say, okay, well, what does that have to do with what you're doing now? I mean, you did get selected in 2004. 2009, I went up into space, Space Shuttle Discovery, as a flight engineer. We went 14 days up to the International Space Station, came back, and in 2010, after I came back to the Valley to share my experiences with the whole community, with the kids, to show them that people like them that have the same experiences as a migrant farm worker can reach for the stars. And I was living proof, and I wanted to tell everybody. But you know what I found in 2010? I found chaos in 2010 at home. After I had left it in 2004, nice and healthy, 2010, we were at the peak of the mortgage foreclosure crisis, with Stockton, Modesto at the epicenter of that crisis. We were twice the national average of unemployment, and yet no one in Washington, at least our representatives, were doing anything about it. And that's when I said, enough is enough. It's time que la gente se represente. It's time for the career politicians to exit and let citizen politicians who know what a gallon of milk costs. A citizen politician that has 5 kids, that has 5 college tuitions staring me in the face, who knows what the college of an education is. That's what we need in Washington. We need people, we need real middle American people that can represent us, and not people that have lost touch with reality. And that's why I'm running for Congress, to represent everybody, not just people in the 10th Congressional District, but in the state of California and all across the nation. Because my job is going to be to do what's best for our country. And a lot of people say, but Jose, this is your first time running for office. Why Congress? Why so high? And I kind of scratched my head at that question, because I look at it, I said, well, you know, I don't think getting data and making a decision based on what's best for your district, your state, and your country, I'm pretty sure that's not rocket science. So I think I can figure it out. And if it is rocket science, I've got you covered. So don't worry. So that's why I'm running for Congress. Muchas gracias. I'm going to be here for everybody. I'll meet everybody, stay as long as we need to. Muchísimas gracias. We got here a little late, so those of you who are wondering how to help, there's a table over there where they'll accept your envelopes. One last thing, I'm going to put a shameless plug for me. 2 weeks ago, I came out with a book. I think it's important for the kids to read. It came out very important for me that the publisher bring it out in English and Spanish simultaneously. So in English, the book is called Reaching for the Stars, by yours truly. En español se llama El Cosechador de Estrellas. You can find it at Barnes & Noble, Borders, Amazon.com, download it electronically, and it's just a book of the story I just told you in long form. And I encourage especially the kids to read it, because it's a self-penned autobiography of my journey a las estrellas. Muchas gracias.
Ladies and gentlemen, is this not the man you want in Congress or not? Let's hear it for Jose Hernandez.